nombre es Simone Rivadeneira y este es un mensaje bilingüe que será repetido en inglés. Soy miembro de la Red de Justicia Lingüística de Comunidades Justas. Voy a proveer interpretación entre inglés y español para la junta hoy día. Un ambiente bilingüe virtual exitoso depende de todos, no solamente de la intérprete. Pueden ayudar teniendo en cuenta algunos puntos. Hablen claramente para asegurar que le podemos escuchar. Hablen a un ritmo moderado. Tengan cuidado de no hablar demasiado rápido, especialmente si están leyendo. Solamente debe hablar una persona a la vez. Hablen en el idioma que se sienten más cómodos y cómodas. En un momento, el anfitrión activará la función de interpretación y en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla podrá seleccionar el idioma que desea escuchar la presentación en inglés o español. O si estás en teléfono o en una tableta, necesitas encontrar el menú de 3 puntos y seleccionar Interpretación de idiomas. Gracias. Hi, my name is Simone Rivadeneira. I am representing the Just Communities Language Justice Network. I will be providing interpretation between English and Spanish for today's presentation. A successful virtual bilingual environment depends on all of us, not just the interpreter. You can help by keeping a few things in mind. Speak clearly to ensure we can hear you. Speak at a moderate pace. Please be careful not to speak too fast, especially if you are reading. Only one person should speak at a time. Speak in whichever language you feel most comfortable. In a moment, the host will turn on the interpretation feature. At the bottom right corner of your screen, you'll be able to select the language you want to hear the town hall in, English or Spanish. This will allow you to hear when speakers of both languages talk, but in your language of preference. Thank you. Oh, sorry. If you are on a phone or tablet, you need to find the three-dot menu and select language interpretation. Thank you.
All right, I'll go ahead and get that started for everyone. Thank you. And if you could just give me one moment, this event will actually be live streamed on our Facebook page, which brings me to my next point, which is that if you want to ask a question live during the webinar, you're welcome to do so. You just need to go to our Facebook page, and in the video, in the comments, go ahead and leave your question, and we'll be taking a few live during the webinar. For most other folks, they went ahead and submitted their questions in advance when they registered. Thank you so much for your participation. We really appreciate it. I went ahead and compiled a few, and that's what we're going to go ahead and ask the congressman later today. The good news is that we'll be taking both live and those questions that we got in advance. So if you ask a question in advance and we don't get to it, you're welcome to ask it on Facebook as well. Without further ado, take it away, Congressman Carbajal.
Thank you, Manal. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight virtually via Zoom and Facebook Live. Thank you to Julia Townsend, who is interpreting tonight's meeting in American Sign Language. I would also like to thank Simone Rivadeneira from Just Communities, who is conducting the simultaneous Spanish translation. Accessibility and transparency from your elected officials is vital to our democracy. Hearing directly from you makes me a better representative for you in Washington. I've been working hard to make sure the voice of our Central Coast community is heard loud and clear in the halls of Congress during this tough time. We are at a very delicate time in our democracy. The violent mob insurrection at the United States Capitol on January 6th will go down in history as one of the most sinister attacks on our democracy by a mob of domestic extremists. Despite the attack, I am proud to say that Congress still fulfilled our duty and still certified the legitimate Electoral College results the same night as the insurrection. I will always work to defend our democracy from threats both foreign and domestic, as the oath we took when I took office as a member of Congress. With the inauguration of President Biden, I am confident that this administration will do everything in their power towards healing our nation, not only from the divisiveness we've experienced over the past few years, but also from the pandemic that continues to plague our communities. With the Biden administration at the helm of our national COVID-19 response, we finally have begun to address the vaccine supply and distribution inadequacies the previous administration left behind by developing a national plan to tackle this crisis. The American Rescue Plan promises to provide the resources necessary to overcome this pandemic and emerge with a strong economy. I will continue to do my part as well by fighting to bring support and federal funding to our community so we can continue to provide for frontline workers, distribute vaccines and PPP, provide for our small businesses, and get direct payments out to those that need assistance the most, and do it now. Frontline workers have been at the center of the pandemic and have kept America running, often at great personal risk to themselves and their loved ones. Because of this, I am proud that recently I introduced a resolution recognizing their hard work and recommitting ourselves to meeting their safety needs. I have heard from community members across the district who have shared their struggles, the struggles that they are experiencing during this pandemic. I know that countless people are still facing financial difficulty and hardship due to job losses, business closures, and/or medical expenses. Many still struggle to pay their rent, utilities, and even most basic necessities, such as food, which remains a tremendous concern for me. That is why, in addition to voting for the COVID-19 relief package in December, I am working hard to pass the American Rescue Plan proposed by President Biden. This relief package is expected to include an additional stimulus payment of $1,400, extended unemployment money, and resources for small businesses, additional rental assistance, and increased funding for food security like SNAP, or programs like SNAP. With the Biden administration now in the office, we have begun to dismantle some of the previous administration's draconian immigration policies, including ending the Muslim ban and halting construction of the border wall, which everybody agreed was not the best way to address our immigration challenges. Now we are moving forward to other immigration reforms, including preserving the DACA program and making sure that we are moving forward to address immigration reforms in a comprehensive way. During this time, many schools, teachers, and students are experiencing difficulties with remote instruction. My colleagues and I in Congress are aware that additional funding is needed to help address this issue and ensure schools can open in a safe manner and soon. The American Rescue Plan sets aside $130 billion for K-12 schools to safely reopen, and it is critical that we pass this bill as soon as possible so students can return to school without risking their health and safety or that of their teachers and/or surrounding communities. Solving the issue we face today will take a concerted and coordinated effort from federal, state, and local governments. If we expect state and local governments to provide for their struggling residents, Congress must ensure they are receiving additional assistance to do so. I'm heartened that the American Rescue Plan will right this wrong and provide critical resources to our local and state governments. At this moment, we are facing multiple crises at the same time. As we contend with the COVID-19 crisis, we must also take steps to fight climate change and protect our environment. I recently introduced 3 bills that do just that. The California Clean Coast Act, which would ban oil drilling off the coast of California and protect our coastal economies. The California Land Preservation Act would halt new oil and gas leasing on federal lands until a thorough review proves it will not harm the environment. And just last week, I introduced the Central Coast Heritage Protection Act to designate over 240 acres of federal land in the Carrizo Plain National Monument and the Los Padres National Forest as wilderness, the highest form of federal protection, which blocks any development in the region, including oil and gas drilling. These pragmatic policies make a real difference in the fight against climate change and help ensure we protect the great outdoors for our children and grandchildren to inherit. This Congress, I am happy to report that I was appointed to chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation. In addition to this new role, I will continue serving the Central Coast as member of the Committee on Agriculture, the Committee on Armed Services, and the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. I believe with the new president and a newly assembled Congress, we are better suited to address today's most pressing problems than ever before. That's just a bit about what I've been working on in Washington and here on the Central Coast, and what is on the horizon. Now I look forward to answering your questions. Manal on my team has compiled the questions you submitted. If you have any new questions during the town hall, you can still, you can still submit them on live streaming the event on my Facebook page, and you can leave your questions in the comments under the video. Manal, what's my first question?
Thank you, Salud. Your first question is coming from Heather from Goleta. And before we go into the questions, I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that, we got a lot of questions. And so we may not be able to get through all of them, but we're going to do our best to get through as many as possible. And any leftover questions we'll be sure to address after the town hall. So our first question is from Heather in Goleta. And she wants to know, could you speak to the vaccine supply issue? I've been reading a lot about a shortage, but there's no explanation for why. And I read something recently that mentioned a bottleneck. I hope you can provide some background and explanation to these vaccine supply issues.
Well, thank you so much, Heather. We were told from the outgoing administration that we had robust supplies. And when this new administration, Biden administration, took over, they found out that indeed that was not the case. We were far short in the supply that was needed to start more aggressively getting out the vaccines. President Biden has put in place the Defense Production Act to be able to produce more vaccines and things that need to be done so that we could get out those vaccines as soon as possible. The Biden administration has bought 200 to 300 million more vaccinations so that we could have a bigger, more robust supply. And they are doing everything possible to get those out as soon as possible to people throughout the country. In particular, what they are also doing is making sure that they are working with states more proactive and local communities to make sure that those vaccines get into the arms of people as soon as possible. The Biden administration has put forth the American Rescue Plan, which is $1.9 trillion, that adds all the resources that are needed to ensure that this plan gets implemented. The production and distribution of more vaccines and more support for unemployed workers, businesses, government agencies, schools, everybody who needs the support so we could open up our economy sooner rather than later.
Thank you so much. And the next question is actually a live question that came in through the Q&A box. And this one is from Doug. What are the chances that the monarch butterfly will be listed on the endangered species list?
Regrettably, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the federal government has not heeded the report that said that they should be listed ASAP. They, along with other species, have not been listed. Part of the reason is a resource issue. So I have joined a number of pieces of legislation as a co-sponsor to direct more funding to ensure that we can move forward with the protection of the habitat and to ensure that we take measures to grow that habitat so that this very important species does not go extinct, the Western monarch species to be exact. So I have also written letters to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife directing them to provide more resources in the form of grants so that we could protect the habitats and take aggressive measures to protect the butterflies. I'm hopeful that in the very near future, we will see the listing of the monarch butterfly, the Western monarch butterfly, as an endangered species.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question, and after we answer this question, I'm going to take a quick break so I can poll the audience about where they're tuning in from. But the next question is going to be from Will in Grover Beach, and he wanted to know, what legislation has the congressman authored, co-authored, or co-sponsored to help combat climate change or support the Green New Deal?
Thank you. Well, you know that the Green New Deal is a framework, a resolution that is aspirational, encouraging us to take aggressive action so that we could address climate change. And we can also ensure that we are not continuing to contribute to the warming of the planet. And so to that end, there are many pieces of legislation that are being introduced by a number of members of Congress. I myself have introduced the California Clean Coast Act, which would ban oil drilling off the coast of California and protect our coastal economies. I've also introduced the California Land Preservation Act, which would halt new oil and gas leasing on federal lands until a thorough environmental review can prove that it will not harm the environment. And lastly, I've also introduced or reintroduced the Central Coast Heritage Protection Act, which will designate over 240,000 acres of federal land in the Carrizo Plain and the Los Padres National Forest as wilderness. These are just three examples of legislation that I have moved forward to address climate change this Congress.
Thank you. And as promised, I'm going to go ahead and start up the poll. Our first poll is, we're trying to get to know from you directly what your issues and priorities are for Congress to address in this upcoming Congress. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Please make your selections of the issues. Please try and keep it to about 3 or 4 if you can. And I'll go ahead and launch it right now. And we'll just give a minute or so. And while we're doing that, we can go ahead and take another question. This one's coming in from Facebook Live. This one's from Jamie. Are there any plans to improve voting rights and democratic representation at the federal level? I think this is something important for us to work on while we can. Congressman?
Thank you. Certainly, there is a lot that we can do. HR 1 will be reintroduced, and that goes to protecting the safety, integrity, and reliability of our voting election systems. And it is so important that we do that because we need to continue to give confidence to the American people that our elections are safe, that investments are made, and just to continue to build on the safety and reliability of our election system. You should know that the elections we just had were some of the most reliable, effective elections we have had. Even Attorney General Barr and others, all 50 states, have corroborated that our election systems have had the highest level of integrity and minimal to no fraud. So I think what HR 1 will continue to do is make investments to give people even more confidence that our elections are fair and effective. And secondly, there's also the importance of making sure that no obstacles exist in promoting voting throughout the country. And HR 4, the John Lewis Voter Rights Act, is another piece of legislation that will be likely introduced in the upcoming weeks and move forward so that, again, we could continue to make sure that no jurisdiction throughout our country is putting up barriers from people that are eligible and willing to vote.
Thank you, Congressman. And I'll go ahead and end the polling now. And not much of a surprise, but COVID-19 response and recovery ultimately was the top voted issue. It's one of the most important issues of the moment, so that makes sense. I'll go ahead and share it with everyone so you can see what the results look like. We'll go ahead and go on to our next question. I've got one more poll for everyone a little bit later, but first and foremost, Congressman, this one came in an email from a constituent named Daisy. As a veteran, you expressed an interest in ensuring undocumented people who served in the U.S. Armed Forces would receive a fast track to citizenship. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Well, that fast track for citizenship already exists. As a matter of fact, that's what helped me become a citizen. I joined the military. I was a permanent legal resident. And that was one of the things that helped me personally become a citizen in a faster track. Also, there are many service members today that are volunteered to be in our military to support and defend our country and our democracy and our Constitution. And they're serving right now throughout the world and here in our country. Regrettably, some of them have parents that are here that are undocumented, but they've applied for legalization. They have been in fear of being deported. And I have issued the Protect Patriots Act, a legislation to ensure that parents of those serving in the military are not separated from their families and can remain in the United States while their application and consideration for their legalization proceeds through the process. That is a bill that I have initiated and hope that it will go forward in the future. Those are just a couple of things that I think are important to know.
Thank you for that. And our next question is from Susan in Nipomo. What are some ways that the federal government is helping to ensure that our agriculture sector continues to thrive and feed us?
Well, it's important to understand that in Congress in 2018, we passed the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill comes up every 5 years. And the Farm Bill has a host of subsidies for farmers throughout the country, whether it's in the form of crop insurance, whether it's in the form of research, whether it's in the form of conservation. It provides support for various commodities. So to help agriculture make sure that they have the resources and the support so that they could continue to strive and prosper throughout the country. I also believe that in the last few COVID economic relief packages, we included funding for PPP and EIDL loans for the agriculture community so they could continue to have access to the resources to help them during this challenging time. I think it's extremely important that we support agriculture because agriculture and their workers, farm workers, are responsible for making sure that the food we have on our tables and in our households and in our markets continues to flow as we've become accustomed to in our country.
Certainly. Thank you, Congressman. The next question, once again, is from Facebook Live, and it's with Diablo Canyon closing, all the effects to the economy from COVID and the continued high cost of living and housing on the Central Coast, what can the federal government do for SLO County to alleviate or mitigate these impacts?
Well, the federal government has already issued 5 economic relief packages to make sure that your local government and your businesses and all the different institutions that are hurting continue to have the resources so that they could stay afloat. This has been a challenging time for everyone, and especially small businesses and restaurants. So we provided various resources in the previous economic relief packages to help as many people as possible. There is the American Rescue Plan that President Biden has put forth that I believe we will be voting on in the next week or two to be able to provide more continued support to local government, to the state of California, to local businesses, for those that are unemployed workers, and for schools so they can open up safely. There's a lot of support that is on its way, and the federal government has a major responsibility of partnering with our states and local communities to make sure that those resources continue to flow to those that are in need.
Thank you. And since we're talking about SLO County, we can go ahead and ask the next poll question, which is, where are you tuning in from? I'll go ahead and launch the poll now. And while folks are voting, we can go on to the next question, which is from Rebecca in Orchid. Wants to know, what, if anything, is being done to help the homeless population on a federal, state, and county level?
Thank you for that question. Well, the federal government continues to provide resources through CDBG, Community Block Grant, development funding, Section 8 vouchers, and various funding to help those that are in need of shelter or who are homeless. And through the various economic relief packages, funding has been provided through FEMA and other programs to help local and state governments deal with the challenge of homelessness. That also, you might have heard, many local communities have set up various sheltering opportunities, hotels, to house many of the homeless so that they are getting the proper care during this challenging time as well. But throughout the year and outside of COVID, various funding continues to flow from the federal government to help local communities have the resources to address homelessness and help them not only with substance abuse and mental health challenges, but to make sure that we are providing the type of housing that's needed to help people get off the streets and have a home to go to.
Thank you for that, Congressman Carbajal. And we'll go on to the next question. I see people are still voting. The next question is from Geraldine in Los Osos. Can you please address the government offset windfall elimination as they relate to Social Security?
Yes, I am a co-author of the recently initiated legislation called the Social Security Fairness Act, which would repeal the GPO Title II and the windfall elimination section. That, I think, would go a long way to address this, what I consider a challenging provision in our Social Security that doesn't allow for full benefits to flow to certain public safety and teachers, for example, throughout our country. And this would make sure that they are compensated for their many years of service in a way that's appropriate and that they deserve.
Thank you, Congressman. And the results are in for where people are tuning in from. And it's actually a pretty closely, evenly split group here. We've got 48% of folks coming in from Santa Barbara County, 46% coming in from San Luis Obispo County, 2% from Ventura County, and 3% from somewhere else. Very interesting information. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. I know that there are many more people who are participating on Facebook Live, and thank you guys all for tuning in there too. The next question is from Sharon in Los Osos. How will you work to foster bipartisanship and help move our elected officials to a more collaborative and respectful way of working together? I am continually appalled at people on both sides of the aisle for their divisive language and actions. Congressman, you're muted if you can.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for that question. As we have come to really not appreciate the gridlock and the partisanship that exists in Washington, as in Sacramento and other places, legislatures. I think the first thing we need to do is take individual responsibility. When I got to Congress, I took a civility pledge that while I would debate passionately, I would never demagogue my colleagues. Because once you do that, and you show disrespect and you don't reflect civility, you don't create relationships and trusts, even with those you agree or those you disagree. And it's so important to model the way, and also to sign up with various caucuses that work towards finding common ground and bipartisanship. I'm a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, the Climate Solutions Caucus, and the Poor Country Caucus, all caucuses made up of Republicans and Democrats committed to finding common ground and working together. So I believe it's important to model the way, to walk the talk, and to find ways that bring about relationship building, trust building, and common ground. And like I said, for starters, we all have to model the way, and we should expect no less from your representatives to ensure that they are modeling the way and taking actions to work in a bipartisan way. It doesn't mean that we don't stick to our principles, our ideologies, and we debate passionately. We should still continue to do that. We should just do it in a civil way.
Thank you for that, Congressman. The next question is coming from the Zoom Q&A box, and it's from Donna. I'm sorry about that, Dana. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the broadband gap. What steps do you see the federal government taking to close that gap and enhance our broadband infrastructure, and how can we support these steps?
Well, in previous COVID packages and this COVID package, the American Rescue Plan that President Biden has put forth, that we will be voting on in a week or so, takes that into account and provides robust funding to help those schools and students that are doing remote and distant learning right now, because we know that not everybody has the resources and the ability and the infrastructure to actually have the resources to provide for that learning. But as important, we also know that there are many communities that are lacking a broadband, fiber optic infrastructure. And there is a robust infrastructure bill that the Biden administration, working with Congress, will be putting forward in the next few weeks or months that will fund and provide significant investments in making sure that we are building out infrastructure in rural communities and throughout the country where we don't have good broadband infrastructure.
Thank you. The next question is about student loan debt. It's from Eric Nicholson from Santa Barbara. And the question is, student loan debt is his biggest concern. He's a teacher and has been faithfully paying back student loans for years. He's not looking to have them wiped out with the wave of a wand, but would just like to see Congress come up with a plan that helps people in careers like his earn some form of forgiveness based on years of service in that particular field. Congressman, can you speak to that?
Yes. Well, we do have the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which is implemented, and we're looking into how to make it more robust. Former Secretary DeVos was responsible for implementing it, and it just wasn't being implemented at the level and rate that it should have. So we're revisiting that to make sure that it's being implemented the way it was devised to be implemented. But we also need to look at opportunities, how to expand that program. For people that are in public service, there should be a way for everyone to have an opportunity to get that student loan debt forgiven. One of the things we also need to do to minimize student loan debt is make sure that we have more robust financial aid. I have initiated and sponsored the Degrees Not Debt Act, which would provide broader Pell Grant and financial aid opportunities to students so that we could have more affordability and more accessibility to higher education without having to take up or take on more student loan debt. We are also looking at working with this administration to cancel out part of student loan debt that exists right now. President Biden has said that he is willing to work to cancel $10,000 as an initiative of individuals who have up to $10,000 for individuals who currently have student debt. I think that is a great step forward that we will be seeing in the near future.
Thank you for that answer as well. The next question is from Myra in Santa Barbara. Is there any discussion on a bill to contain and deal with the horrific rise of domestic terrorism in this country following the attack on our capital?
Yes, there's the Domestic Terrorist Prevention Act that I am a co-sponsor of and has already been introduced. And that will go a long way to address domestic terrorism and extremist groups in our country. We need to do more. We saw that former President Trump incited a violent mob and an insurrection at the United States Capitol. It was violent. We had loss of life, officers that died as a result of that attack. And we need to make sure that those individuals that are responsible are held accountable. But one of the ways we could address a lot of those groups that were involved in that act of insurrection, violent insurrection, is to make sure that we are aggressively going after extremist groups in our country. And that's what that legislation will do. And I'm proud to be a co-sponsor.
Thank you, Congressman. And we got another question live on Zoom. This one is from Lee. How would the COVID-19 rescue package direct much needed resources to local governments? This is something that Republicans have opposed, but is essential to public health departments doing their jobs.
Well, the first thing is making sure that support for state and local governments is included. It was not included in previous rounds because my colleagues across the aisle refused to allow for resources for state and local governments in this, especially in the last round of COVID economic relief. In this American Rescue Plan that President Biden has put forth, almost $2 trillion, 1.9 trillion to be exact, there's $350 billion included for state and local government assistance. And that money will come some directly to the states and some directly to local communities. That is in the process of being worked out. But we've seen in the past when we did provide some assistance to local governments, that assistance was only made available directly to communities over 500,000 population, which in my district, there's very few municipalities that have that amount of population. There's Ventura County, but not Santa Barbara, and not San Luis Obispo counties or any of the smaller cities. The state was able to provide some assistance as part of that funding in the past, but it was minimal compared to what they could have received. And now we're making sure that additional funding for local governments and states continues to be included in the upcoming American Rescue Plan.
Thank you. The next question came from Michael in Goleta, and his question is, elderly Asian Americans have been unfairly targeted for robbery and personal attacks in cities across the country. Can you please advise on your approach in addressing this wave of attacks on local, regional, and national levels? How do we educate and stop the spread of these attacks?
Well, first of all, no group, in this case, the Asian community, no citizen, no residents, no individual or groups of individuals in this country should be attacked, period. And if this is happening in any way, shape, or form to the Asian community, in this case, as being identified, we need to make sure that we are working with law enforcement at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level to make sure we're bringing resources to bear and make sure that we are aggressively addressing this, because nobody should have to endure any type of undue oppression, crimes in any way, shape, or form. So we need to make sure that we are, from a law enforcement standpoint, addressing that issue as soon as possible, collectively and effectively.
Thank you. And the next question is from Mark in Templeton. Mark wants to know, what steps are being taken to address voter fraud and secure the election process? How can our republic survive if our elections do not reflect the wishes of our citizens, regardless of their political affiliation?
Well, Mark, you'll be pleased to know that we just finished a major presidential election, and it was deemed by Republican and Democrat governors and Secretary of States who are responsible for voting systems in their states. It was deemed one of the most reliable and safest elections with the highest level of integrity. There was very little to no fraud, or widespread fraud was not detected or found anywhere. And as a result, I think what we can do is continue to do two things. Continue to move forward legislation such as HR 1 that continues to make investments in our existing election systems throughout the country to make sure that we are even continuing to make them safer and more reliable, to give everybody the confidence that you are seeking. And secondly, we need to do something that is equally important, and that is pass the HR 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We need to restore the Voting Rights Act in a way that ensures that any and all Americans that can vote and are willing to vote do not have barriers to do so. We need to make sure that we make voting easy and accessible and safe and reliable. And the way you do that is by making sure that states don't have any opportunities to put up barriers to prevent people from voting and exercising their right to vote.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question is from, it's actually a Facebook Live question, and it is from Betty. What are you doing about opening schools and businesses and putting more people back to work in Lompoc, California?
Well, I think we're all working together. The CDC, Center for Disease Control, has put forward a framework that outlines how schools could reopen safely and what would be required to be able to do so. The state of California is working with schools locally to be able to safely open up schools as soon as possible, to make sure that vaccinations are available and to ensure that they have the resources. The federal government is moving forward the American Rescue Plan next week that will put over 120 or 130 million dollars towards K through 12 schools so that they could have the resources for PPE, personal protection equipment, for ventilation systems, for additional staffing, to be able to have, to make sure that we have the social distancing for students, and the type of environment where we could open quickly but safely. And the federal government will be providing a lot more additional funds to make sure that we have the safest conditions and environment so that our children could get back to school as soon as possible, but in the safest way possible.
Thank you, Congressman. And building off of the question about the relief package, we actually have one more. This one is from Dawn in Atascadero. Could you please explain on the realities of the new relief bill? Will it include minimum wage increases, individual relief checks, and accountability to Trump for this insurrection?
Yes, the economic relief package does include the $15 minimum wage increase. It also includes direct payments of $1,400 per individual, provided they have a Social Security. And it provides so much more robust funding for unemployed workers, for businesses, for schools, for local governments. It actually does a really good job of making sure that everybody has the resources to stay afloat.
Thank you, Congressman. And the next question is from Marilyn Brewer in Santa Barbara, and you touched on this a little bit earlier, but this one's a little bit more specific. So how do you feel about HR 1 and HR 51, which is the DC statehood bill?
Well, I think HR 1 is essential. It provides for getting big money out of politics. It provides for making sure that we get corruption out of politics, where members of Congress don't have a revolving door to continue to work as lobbyists and make sure that we are investing in making sure that the Voting Rights Act is being implemented throughout the country in a way where everybody who can vote and wants to vote has the ability to vote without fear, and that we take away all the barriers. It's really making sure that the integrity and reliability of our election system is at the highest standards. That's the kind of thing that we need to do. What was the other part of the question?
HR 51, which is
HR 51, that's the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia has more population than the state of Vermont. And the state of Vermont has 2 US senators and a representative at least that represents Vermont. The District of Columbia has more population, but yet they are taxed like everybody else throughout the country. But they have they're taxed, but they have no representation. And I think it's time that we really look at jurisdictions like that, like we've had in previous times. Hawaii was once like that, and then they became a state. The District of Columbia is another situation like that. Puerto Rico is another territory as well. We need to start looking at the rightness of being able to look at these areas and their opportunity to become United States, provided that they fit all the criteria. It is appropriate to start looking at that. We don't want United States citizens to be taxed and have no representation. Representation, if you're taxing someone, they should have the right to have representation. And don't forget, residents of Puerto Rico are United States citizens. Residents of the District of Columbia are United States citizens. It's just a matter of jurisdictional representation.
Thank you, Congressman. And the next question is from Julia in San Luis Obispo. What efforts are you engaging in to restore our confidence in the U.S. Postal Service?
Well, there is the United States Postal Fairness Act that I am a co-sponsor of. There's also the Delivering for America Act, which was sponsored in the last Congress. As you recall, in my district here on the Central Coast, we had a number of mailboxes that were removed, and the postmaster happened to be doing that during one of the most significant elections. And it was causing much concern that there was a concerted effort to minimize the ability for our United States Postal Service to deliver mail, especially ballots that were arriving in people's mailboxes so they could vote, the delivery of voting ballots. We need to make sure that we're doing everything possible to ensure that the United States Postal Service is fully funded. And the way you do that is to not treat it like we've been treating the United States Postal Service, making them do what no other federal agency does: pay the retirement medical benefits in advance. We don't require that of any other federal agency, and we shouldn't do that for the United States Postal Service. If we didn't do that, they would have the necessary resources to be 100% whole and to be able to deliver our mail without additional resources in an effective and appropriate fashion.
Thank you, Congressman. And the next question is again from Facebook Live. It's from Lily. How can we help people internationally who are also suffering greatly from COVID-19?
Well, the United States has always been a good international steward, and we are the richest country in the world. And we have always provided assistance and aid to other countries, especially developing countries that have less resources. And the United States has always been a goodwill ambassador and an investor in countries that have less resources, especially in the areas of basic needs like healthcare support, vaccinations, and what have you. Because at the end of the day, when somebody from another country travels, if they're ill, if they have a virus and they come across an American that is contaminated with the virus, they come back to the United States. We end up having pandemics, and we need to make sure that we provide assistance to those countries, at least in small part, so that we could be good world citizens as a country.
Certainly, thank you for that, Congressman. We're getting down to our final few questions here. Another one from Facebook Live is from G. Michael Curto. And the question is, can we get more businesses and government contracts and activity for Vandenberg Air Force Base?
Thank you for that question. Well, that is the goal. The goal is to look at opportunities at the Vandenberg Air Force Base that could expand commercial launch and that entire industry so that we can help not only our national security, but help our local economy by producing more commercial launch opportunities. But to be able to do that, Vandenberg Air Force Base needs a number of infrastructure upgrades. And those are things that I have been working on the House Armed Services Committee to make sure that Vandenberg Air Force Base has the support and resources to upgrade their infrastructure so that it could lend itself to not only national launch capabilities, Department of Defense capabilities, but also commercial launches that will help our local economy. So yes, there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that I'm working on as in my role as a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Salud. And we'll take our last question now. This one came from Zoom, and it's from Patricia Harris from Cambria. Her question is, I'm concerned about COVID vaccines for our agricultural community. As essential workers, I'm wondering, where are they on the priority list for our county?
Thank you. Essential workers across the board need to have high priority. And I think that our CDC, the state of California, and our local communities are doing the best they can. But essential workers are individuals that are in certain work sectors that we rely on and expect them to go to work despite the challenges. So because they are putting themselves and their loved ones and their families at risk, we should give them a high priority. They do have a high priority. They're in the group in the phase 1B of our priority list. And it's my understanding we are now at the priority that they have for vaccination. The only problem that we are experiencing right now is that there are not enough vaccinations. So the federal government is in the process of accelerating the development of vaccinations and distributions to states and local communities, because the previous administration didn't do enough in that respect. So that is something that's going on now. Moreover, the Biden administration has put forward the American Rescue Plan, which provides almost $2 trillion and a huge investment in vaccination development and distribution to make sure that our schools, our essential workers, that certain essential workers have higher priority. We started obviously with healthcare workers, with senior centers, with individuals over 75 years. Then we went to 65 years, individuals over 65 years. And now we are continuing with the other priority essential workers, such as farm workers and other sanitation workers and teachers.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And that was our final question. I just want to thank everyone once again, including our two interpreters, for joining us today. And thank you again so much for all of your wonderful questions. This has been a great town hall, and I'll let Congressman Carbajal close it out for us.
Thank you to everyone who joined me this evening, and thank you to our ASL interpreter, Julia, and our Spanish translator, Simone. I also want to thank you for joining me today and for asking such great questions. I'm always glad to hear directly from my constituents. We have endured so much together over this last year, and finally, we are beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. My office is always available for assistance with information about stimulus payments, IRS issues, and any other federal agency, such as Veterans Agency or Medicare or Social Security. You may have issues with any other federal agency. If you do, please don't hesitate to contact us. My office is, you could visit my website at carbajal.house.gov or call at 805-730-1710. Stay safe and be well, everyone. Have a good evening.